Okay, here we go. How you doing?
Great.
You are?
Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party of Canada.
How long you been elected MP now?
I've been a member of Parliament for Saanich-Gulf Island since May 2nd, 2011, so we're coming up to a year and a half.
Year and a half. So how does it feel? I mean, I know the salary is much better, but how does it feel to go from being in the outside and now a elected MP? How does it feel?
It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I have a huge level of respect for Canadian democracy, for the parliamentary process, so I revel in it. I've been involved with parliamentary proceedings when I worked in government in the 80s, so I had a good knowledge of how Parliament is supposed to work. It's not working the way it's supposed to work. It's clearly being distorted and I'd say corrupted by the way Mr. Harper runs government. But for me, as a member of Parliament for Saanich-Gulf Islands, I have such wonderful support from people in my community and my riding, and the rules of Parliament are there to ensure that every single member of Parliament has a voice. And that's what the party process, the top-down structure of the other parties, means that most Canadians are really surprised when I say every member of Parliament has the clout and the ability to do things. So I revel in what I'm doing. I really love it.
Did you feel you were treated differently once you were elected?
Oh, well, yeah, of course. I mean...
More respect?
Yeah, I mean, the week before the election in May 2011, British Columbia is one of its largest radio stations. CKNW did an interview with me in which the interviewers questioned to me, and this is literally less than a week before May 2nd election, said, with all due respect, you couldn't get elected dog catcher. So you got to say, now, you know, at the time, I will admit I wasn't running for dog catcher, and he may well have been right. Maybe I shouldn't be a dog catcher. I have no skills for being a dog catcher. I'd want to keep all the dogs I found. I'd worry about them. It's not the job for me.
No.
So but I'm a member of Parliament, and I don't get questions quite like that anymore.
Have you been in Nova Scotia, your hometown?
No, not since summer. I was able to get back and visit my dad. My dad's 86 and not all that well, so I was able to get back home in Cape Breton to visit him in July. But with my home being in British Columbia, it's quite the haul between British Columbia and Ottawa, and trips to Cape Breton are too few, I admit.
I protested during the last election. I was surprised. I went to a political election rally of Stephen Harper, but I had to register.
Yeah.
Since when you got to have registered people to attend a election rally?
Since Stephen Harper has been running election rallies. I mean, he's actually, I think it's quite outrageous that the RCMP has agreed to do what he's asked. But they're not just screening people from his rallies if they might be, I mean, obviously the RCMP has to protect the Prime Minister's personal safety. But people have been excluded from rallies if the RCMP have found that on their Facebook pages they're shown with, say, a member of another party. That is absurd and anti-democratic, and the Prime Minister keeps himself in a bubble. I can tell you, nobody else in journalism has asked me this, but the Prime Minister keeps himself in a bubble even in the House of Commons. Even he won't use the same members of Parliament entrance that every Prime Minister has used since they've had that door. All MPs, all cabinet members, and the Prime Minister always came in through the front door on the farthest west side of the building that was an entry only for members of Parliament. The Prime Minister doesn't use that entrance. He and his 5-car, well, it's actually 2 big sedans and 3 big black SUVs that are bulletproof with smoky glass windows. They pull up in front of the building and take him to the service entrances. So he doesn't even, I mean, you don't run into the Prime Minister in the House of Commons either. He keeps a very tight level.
Does he think he's Obama or the President of the United States? Or
President Obama is much more accessible than Stephen Harper. I think he needs, I mean, Don Martin in the National Post once described Stephen Harper as a control freak with a mean streak. And he is the ultimate control freak. I think he does not want, even if it's a friendly encounter, he doesn't want to open himself up to the random encounter with a Canadian. Remember Brian Mulroney and that dear old lady from Quebecois lady who said, "Goodbye, Charlie Brown."
Charlie Brown. The Moody Prime Minister, Charlie Brown.
That's what you don't want. You don't want that random person who walks up and says, "Goodbye, Charlie Brown," and it gets on camera. So he controls all of his events. They pick the sort of average Canadian family for photo ops. They go through screening their house. They tell them what to say.
How come we haven't had no riots on the streets since he's been elected?
Well, Canadians don't riot in the street. It's not part of our cultural history.
No, we don't want that.
Right? But I think we've got a tremendous amount of discontent. And I think what we need is, given that we're Canadians and we're not likely to riot in the streets, We need Canadians who are concerned about this to write letters to the editor of local newspapers. That helps. That helps.
Right to the Irving paper?
Yeah, write letters to the editor.
Don't answer
eventually get published. Contact social media groups. Join groups like Lead Now. Get their bulletins. Join online petitions. And when they call for a demonstration, show up.
Yeah, but people don't show up. Were you concerned with the Parti Québécois when the shooting happened election night?
Oh, I was very
That was scary,
concerned. Well, it was very concerning. I actually ended up being called by BBC. It was the top story on BBC right after I'd watched Peter Mansbridge, where they hadn't changed the broadcast from before the shooting happened. So here I was doing BBC, and they were saying, and now to our top story, a shooting in Quebec, and we go to the leader of the Green Party. And I told them ahead of time, why interview me? I don't know anything more than any other Canadian. They said, yes, but you're a Canadian political leader, and we want your comments. Yeah. So what I was able to tell BBC was, because they were wondering, is this a movement? Is there an anti-French movement in Quebec? And I said, absolutely not. This is most likely one very disturbed individual who had his hands on a gun. One person has been killed. It's a terrible tragedy. But it's not reflective of some kind of divisive mood in Quebec. Most Quebecers were happy with the results they got. They punished the Liberals. They didn't give the PQ too much. And they told CAQ, you have to wait. You're not quite big enough to grow.
You got to admire those Quebecois. They know how to do it. Huh? Like the Irish crunch, the Irish crush went through.
The student protests were very impressive. And particularly when their parents and grandparents came out banging pots and pans. It wasn't just a youth protest. And I think Jean Charest made a huge mistake, because Bill 71 that he passed was so draconian that you couldn't gather together. Initially, I think it was, you couldn't get 30 people together for any purpose without telling the RCMP in the morning. And people were thinking, well, do we have to warn them about family reunions? If we're planning a picnic in our backyard, do we warn? So at that point, instead of having the protests dwindle, they got bigger and bigger and bigger, and they involved the parents and the grandparents. So I think that was a very impressive public mobilization. But again, Quebec culture's different from the rest of Canada. We don't get, even if you were to tell students in most universities your tuition's going up, they might write graffiti on walls, but I don't know if they'd be able to mobilize the way the Quebec students did.
Don't answer this, but I'm not a fan of Quebecois. I'm an Acadien, but anyway, that's another story. But now, let me ask you a question. Lots of bloggers in Ottawa?
Yes, lots.
Right, lots of bloggers. Oh.
Right.
Do they follow you like a paparazzi?
No, I very rarely run into a blogger.
Usually the bloggers are anonymous. They're cowards.
That's right. Most bloggers are anonymous. Most tweeters, particularly the trolls, the ones that write really misogynistic, abusive things, they're not real people. I think they really work for corporations, and they just pretend to be real people to try to skew the public discourse in a way that's extremely regressive and against climate action and against social justice. So they dominate some of the social media sites, and they are part of the domination technique is to use ad hominem rhetoric that makes people feel like, I don't want to go on that site because I'm going to get attacked and called bad names.
Yeah. How many followers do you have on your Twitter? I think I'm one of them.
Oh, good. Thanks. I think about 45,000 right now.
45,000? Yeah. So you tweet a lot?
Yeah, I tweet. When people ask me questions, I write back.
Can you tweet after this is over? I just got interviewed by the infamous blogger, Charles LeBlanc. I would really appreciate that.
Easily. I tweet a lot because people ask me questions, and I think Twitter is one of the most interesting ways that a politician can become completely open and accessible to people across the country. And that's part of my job, so that's why I'm happy to do it.
Listen, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Charles.
It's always a pleasure.
C'est un grand plaisir.
Puis ton français vient bien?
Bien sûr.
Bien sûr?
Oui, je parle français.
Il faut que tu parles de chiac. Le chiac. Half English, half French.
Oui, je suis aussi acadien à cause de toute ma vie que j'ai habité à Cap-Breton. À l'île de Cap-Breton. Et à cause de ça, je parle français un peu avec un accent. Oui, près de Chéticamp, dans Havre de Marguerite. Et tous mes amis acadiens, j'ai travaillé dans mon restaurant.
C'est bon?
Oui, sur la côte de le golfe de Saint-Laurent avec mes amis acadiens. À cause de ça, quand je parle en français, je fais les fautes comme... Oh, ce n'est pas une faute, mais c'est les différences d'accent. Par exemple, près de moi, il y a la ville de Grand-Étang. Tout le monde dit Grand-Étang. Et à cause de ça, quand j'ai parlé avec Stéphane Dion la première fois, quand il était le ministre de l'Environnement, j'ai dit, nous avons les problèmes avec les étangs goudrons. C'est quoi? Les étangs. Alors, en québécois dit étang. En Cap-Breton, nous disons étang, mais je fais la différence quand je parle avec les gens acadiens et je parle avec les gens québécois.
Tu vois le car, là? Mon car est dans le driveway. mon car est dans le driveway.
Ouais.
Ma voiture est dans le stationnement.
Exactement.
C'est différent.
C'est un mélange.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.